thank you so much to All About Writing, first of all, for co-hosting this online workshop. It is just such a tremendous help and a great way to combine forces that we do this together. And then also to the National Arts Council for funding our next short stories anthology, Power. And that's why you're all here, perhaps to get some tips around what we require as far as the theme goes. The workshops are intended to spark ideas, and especially for the newbies, new writers or emerging writers, to talk about how to write a short story and make it seem less daunting. So please mute yourselves, but keep your screen on, and please do send in questions in the chat, and we'll try and answer those as we go along. Yeah, my name is Joanne Hichens. I'm the curator of the Short Stories project. And Power, I think, will be the 9th of these anthologies. So we've managed to keep going for pretty much a decade, a couple of gaps in between, but it's just such a wonderful project to work on because it includes stories from emerging writers as well as established writers. And I always get so incredibly excited when the stories start to come in and I begin to read, and I'm just always astounded by the talent out there and the stories and the settings. It just is a smorgasbord of South African writing. For those of you that haven't written for us before, many writers write 2 or 3 times before they finally are anthologized. So it really is just a way to flex your writing muscles, to write a new story, and to write to limits, which often helps as well. I think a deadline is always really helpful. As well as a theme, and it's a short story. So the thing about a short story, as we discussed last time, is it's short. You have 3,000 words to 5,000 words to get from the beginning to the end. So unlike a novel, one can actually write it in a few weeks, possibly 2 months, definitely. And one isn't giving up years of one's life to finish that novel. And we all have that novel within us. But I think especially for the people that are just starting, a short story is a really good way to flex those writing muscles. Okay, so I always like to take a moment just to settle. We rush in, we switch our screens on, but we also just need to take stock of ourselves before we start. So perhaps just switch off cell phones if they're still on. Try to relax and just close your eyes for a moment. And just take a deep breath in. Commit to the next couple of hours. Breathe out any anxiety that you might still be carrying. All of us have busy lives, and often to do a workshop, we've got to switch off that life, close the door. So just breathe in your own capacity, your own capability. Breathe out any tension. And remember as well, in the beginning, all things are dark. And as we are writing about power and lighting the dark, I just thought that we should remember too, the blank page is also unknown. And the more we write, the closer we get to giving shape and form to a story, to lighting the dark. And that's what we're going to do more of today. So just take a last breath. And breathe out and open your eyes. In our last workshop, we explored the theme power. We talked about power as well as powerlessness. So just to recap briefly, we can't really understand power and what power brings us or gives us, or the times we feel powerless, without also understanding powerlessness. The times where our power has been affected or taken away, whether it's not having a vote or being assaulted or losing at a competition or whatever the case might be. So we're not going to go over that again this time, but it's just if you're here today for the first workshop, it's something that you can do on your own, is just to write into the whole idea of what is power for you, and what is powerlessness. And also to look at power imbalances, because that will give rise to character. So basically, we unlocked our beliefs and ideas around the theme, and then we went on to begin a mini story, looking at ideas around character. That story comes from character, just as the story of our own lives comes from who we are as people. We also discussed cause and effect, the what happens next factor that keeps a story moving forward until some sort of timely conclusion. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about what happens next today. And again, we go back to character, what happens between them, what conflict arises, what is at the heart of your story. So this time, we're going to keep those ideas in mind around power, and we're going to try and loosen up even more story ideas. So some of you might be well on your way to writing a story. Others may have just experimented last week, and you may find yourselves in a position this week of thinking, well, I'd like to actually try out a few more ideas before I commit myself to a particular short story. So I'm going to just talk a little bit more about the short story. There's no right way to do this. You might have heard of the phrase pantsers and plotters. Some people work out the exact details of their story. They plot out every single step. Before they even put down a word, they want to know what's going to happen, in what sequence. And then others, we call ourselves the pantsers. I think I'm much more a pantser than a plotter. And it's basically a reference to writing from the seat of your pants, to write without a plot or a specific outline and to see what happens. But really, I think a combination of both is ideal. It's always best to at least have a direction, and as we say it all about writing as well, a destination, so that you know at least the path that you're going and the destination that you're working towards. But how you get there and the route you take will inform that destination and will inform the shape of your story. I thought I would just briefly share my own process. For me, a story comes through something I experience, and often through being in a particular setting. For me, setting usually sparks a story. Place for me is very important. And I know I've said story comes from character, but once I have that setting, I place the character in that setting, and then I work with character. So for instance, a story that I'm working on at the moment, and it has nothing to do with power, but I thought I'd share it with you anyway, is just to help you understand what we're going to do next, is that I was once on a walk, this is last year, in fact, on a beach on the Wild Coast, and I started to notice how much plastic there was on the beach. And we were a group of us, and I was walking silently, and I started then to pick up the rubbish and put it in my backpack. And of course, there was too much to really stuff into my bag. So at the next stop, I got a black bag and I started to fill that too. And then I thought to myself, what if I write a story about a woman who gets obsessed about picking up plastic on the beach? And then I started to think about where all the plastic comes from. I knew it wasn't local waste. It could have blown in from China, across the waters. And then I started to write more into this whole idea. This was in the evening after the walk. What if this woman just never leaves the beach? She leaves the group. She just keeps on with this obsession about plastic. And that's what I would like you to do now, is to consider that question, what if? So it's a kind of a warm-up in a sense. I want you to bring a character to a setting and bring the character and the setting to your page or to your screen, always asking, what if? What if my character does this or that in this place or that place? Keep on going back to the question, what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? You're trying here to get a basic idea for a story. And once you have an idea that gels with you, and I often say this to my writers, is you've got to feel it in the gut. You've got to think, yes, I want to write that story of the woman on a beach, because in some way it appeals to my sensibility and my belief system. So once one has that spark of a story, you use it to generate more ideas, and in that way you build your story. So you might have your own ideas, or if you're feeling stuck or you want to explore alternative ideas, what we're going to do now is just to put some images on the screen, and you might see something that sparks the what if, something that appeals to you or speaks to you. There might be a character in a setting that tugs at your gut, and then just allow your thoughts to write themselves out, so to speak. For example, what if a security guard arrives at a station and sees someone stealing copper wires? What if a bodybuilder starts taking steroids and develops health problems, ... What if on a dark, load-shedding night, a couple take a risk and go for a walk on a beach? What I'd like you to do is look at the pictures and to try and get at least 3 different ideas down, inspired by the images, and then tease out those ideas. So we're going to do this for 10 minutes. Just free write. We spoke about this last week. Free writing is basically just allowing the ideas to come. Don't be self-critical. Don't think, oh, this sucks. And that's what we do as writers. Oh, this is a terrible idea. Or, oh, why am I here? Saturday afternoon, I could be at the beach. I don't have any talent. We all do that. So just allow the ideas to come. Don't edit it. Don't go back and start crossing words out. This is really just a way of generating ideas. So there's quite a variety of images. Trish, shall we just go through the first lot? And, I don't think I'm even going to say anything about these images. I think just take a moment to look at them, and I'm going to set my little clock, and I'll see you on the other side of 10 minutes. And if you get stuck, just go back to that question, what if? And we'll alternate the pictures on the screen. So thanks, everyone. They're around 6 slides. It's very basic, just for you to unlock ideas. And start writing at any time. Okay, that's my trusty little alarm. So just come back to the room and take a deep breath again if you need to. Some of us get quite into that timed writing exercise. We allow ourselves just to let it out on the page. And I think that is the positive aspect of doing a timed exercise, is that we know that we have just that short amount of time to write something. And in some way, it's a little bit like a kick up the butt in a sense. So it is a way of generating ideas. And I believe that the more ideas we have to choose from, the better. So in the next exercise, what we're going to do, just to be a little bit general first, is we're going to write a scene. Whereas that was a warm-up exercise, we're now going to focus more on actually creating a story, or at least creating a beginning or a start of a story, or writing a scene that might fit into a story in some way. A story is often made up of a selection of scenes. Well, it is like beads on a string. They're kind of the beads are the scenes. The string is the exposition that holds those beads together and creates a kind of circularity, a certain closure for a story. A story is like seeing a movie in our heads. So if we imagine watching a movie, we become engrossed in one particular scene. And that's what we're trying to recreate on the page. We're trying to recreate that sense of immersion, or create that sense of immersion, that a reader will read a scene and be right there in that scene with the character or characters. And I know Josie Richards and Richard, they use the wonderful phrase cascading scenes. So that's another way to look at a story. Cascading scenes, one scene grows out of the previous scene. And again, we have cause and effect. If something happens to a character, then there will be a consequence to that. And that's the way we build the story. And again, as I said last week, we build that through writing. Setup scenes are an anticipation, whereas payoff scenes are the consequence, which may give a surprise, giving new significance to the setup. We may anticipate wrongly. So from my example last week, if you were here, you might remember that I mentioned an unhappy husband and wife. We may set up the story to imagine that the husband and wife may split up, or that is at least the kind of underlying message we are supplying the reader with. It seems as if everything in the story is geared towards the fact that they are going to go their separate ways. And then in the end, they don't, they stay together. So that's a very basic example, but it's a surprise. So the end of the story might bring a reconciliation for our couple, which was unexpected. And I think one does want that sense of the unexpected in a story. So just bear that in mind as we go along. But now look through what you've written, and you might have written 3 or 4 or more ideas from your what if list, your what if scenarios. Your scenarios, you will see, will include a character in a setting, and perhaps even some sort of conflict or inner conflict or struggle is beginning to show itself. Some of you might have got quite far with this, perhaps using one idea. Some of you might have brought your own ideas along. But in this next bit, what we're going to do is to use a character in a setting and to begin writing, thinking of your story as that journey of discovery, that bearing in mind that destination that I was talking about earlier. So again, we're going to ask questions. Who is on the journey? Your character. Where is your character in a particular setting? What is your character hoping for? What are your character's thoughts, feelings as they're in that setting? What do they see, hear, and experience directly through their senses? So bear all of this in mind. Rudyard Kipling's guides, let's call them, that kind of turn of the 19th century British writer, called his guides what and where and when and why and how and who. So if you get stuck, just keep on asking yourself questions and then taking the story forward. So asking questions can help you through every stage of the writing process. The questions will help you uncover story. They're there to help you find a framework. They can help you get through those uncertain times when you don't know what happens next. And this is the power of asking questions. So last week we wrote from the third person point of view. This time I thought we'd try out first person, the I point of view. So whereas third person, we're writing he, she, or they did this, that, and whatever. Now we are placing ourselves in the shoes of the character, and we are going to see the story unfold through our character's eyes. Even though you're writing as I, remember that the I is not you, it is your character. You become that person. So really try and imagine yourself as that character. And another limitation is to write in the present tense. So what I'm going to do as well is just give you an example. If I was writing a story about a gym bunny, this is what I might write from the first person point of view and in the present tense, which means the story unrolls immediately. I head in through the revolving door, hit immediately by the air conditioning. Thank goodness it's cooler in here, but the gym is packed. I knew I shouldn't have come at 5 o'clock because every housewife and every runty teen is here taking up space on machines just so they can earn their free smoothie at Kauai later. I walked to the changing room, packed too. The thing about me is I'm an introvert. I don't like crowds. I don't like the scent of other people's bodies. I decide to head for the sauna instead. At least there I can gather my thoughts. The reason I'm here, tiptoeing around in my flip-flops in case I get athlete's foot, is that he is here. It's the reason I joined the gym in the first place. I see him, that African mask tattoo on his left shoulder. I swear it speaks to me, and I see him walking right over to me. So you can get a sense that written in the first person, in the present, I'm already writing a lot of information into that character. And that's what I'd like you to try and do now. For those of you that have started a story in the third person, you might like to try switching to the I point of view, as sometimes doing that as an exercise gives us even more insight into our characters. Remembering that story again comes through our character, what we know about them. Ideally, we have to know the heart of our characters in order to write rounded and authentic characters. And that's where detail comes in too. So when I was writing that line about the athlete's foot kind of tickled me because I thought, yes, this character is definitely going to be a little bit obsessive compulsive. So again, it's through the writing that you discover the character. And a further instruction is that by the end of the scene, your character must encounter someone else. So in other words, bring in another character, whether you see them walking towards you or you go and find them or you talk to them on the cell phone or whatever. So for instance, in my scene, by the end of it, I might say, oh, hi, Ronaldo, good to see you again. And that's what I'd like you to focus on for the next 10 minutes. Your character in a setting from the I person point of view, present tense, and see what you can discover about your character and if you can get some sense of a story going. All right, 10 minutes. I'll see you on the other side.
Yellow. Kelly's taking this challenge to a whole nother level. Not only is she getting yellow through,
Okay, my trusty night owl has let us know that it's the end of that exercise. So welcome back, everyone. What you've done is to show us your character. And I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about show, don't tell in the second half of our session today. But basically, we want to see your characters. We don't want you to tell us about your characters. We want to see them as people. And yes, I say people because they do become people. Just as when we read, we fall in love with characters because they seem so real to us, which is called a suspension of disbelief, which means that when we're reading, we actually believe in that character. And while we immersed in the pages of that book, we imagine them as a fully formed person. When we write, we fall in love with our characters too. We're interested in them and invested in them. So what you've done is you've got to know your character a little bit better in a setting. Perhaps you have included details of the setting. You've created some kind of conflict between your characters at the end of what you've written. So what we are going to do now is move to the next step. In any story, you need to bring your character to some sort of crossroads or conflict. And in a story, there are usually several of those crossroads. So in the next section, you're going to write your character is going to be in a situation where they're forced to do something. Your character will have to make a choice according to who or she or they are, what they believe, what their intention is, what they're hoping for, as we said earlier, what their motivation is. Motivation is a absolute necessary element to have in a character because your character is there because they are motivated to do something. So my gym bunny, for instance, she might have come to the gym not because she wants to exercise, but because she wants to bump into Ronaldo, hoping that there's going to be some frisson between them and they will head off into the sunset and live happily ever after. So if you don't know already what your character's need is, your character's drive or motivation, bring it into this next scene and have your character act in accordance to that motivation. There must be some kind of driving force within a character, no matter how subtle. For instance, in my story, my character is in lust with Ronaldo, but perhaps it is the tattoo she's actually in lust with. Perhaps she wants a tattoo just like it, is just like it. Excuse me. She wants the tattoo itself. She believes in its magical power. What is she willing to do for it? And you can see how story begins to take on a life of its own. Remember, no conflict, no story. Conflict can exist on several levels. It can be internal, external, or societal, but it must manifest in action. And that's what you're going to do now. You're going to focus on some sort of action. So perhaps my characters could get into an argument, or they could go into the underground parking lot and have sex. It can be a war of values fought within, or a battle of wills between two people or more. So try and identify the conflict, if you haven't already, and to play it out in the next scene. Try and bring in some dialogue into the scene. What do your characters say to each other? And remember, your character is at a crossroads. Your character will have to choose a fork in a road. So that's what you're going to do in this next section. You're going to put your characters together and you're going to see what happens between them in the setting that you've chosen. And you've got 10 minutes for that as well. Continue writing in the I person. Look around for detail to add to your scenes. Use dialogue to move them along. And by the end of the scene, get to a fork in the road. Okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, and that's the end of that section. And I know that it's quite a lot of writing, but I really do believe that's where we find our answers. So the more we write, the more the answers come to us and the more surprises happen. And I mentioned this as well last time, that we imagine that we can sort it all out in our heads, that, you know, if we lie in bed for an hour, we can imagine an entire story and we can create that story and then just go and take dictation from the heavens and put it down on the page. But I really do believe that the story builds and the surprises come and those interesting parts of the journey happen when you're actually writing. It's as if your pen or your fingers tip-tapping are taking you on that journey. And by allowing your character to grow, you learn more about who they are, what they would do, how they would react in certain instances, and you learn more about your setting as you explore it. I want to emphasize as well that a mistake that many writers make, and especially the newer writers, is to include in their stories at the beginning 3 pages of backstory on the character. So backstory is really the background of a character. It is the character's life in every single detail, where they were born, where they went to school, whether they got married and lived happily ever after or not. Did they get A's and B's at school? All of that is just simply not necessary in a short story. You want an immediate sense of the character, and we often want to start the story in medias res, which is in the action. So for instance, in my story, I won't have my character sitting at home, putting on her gym outfit, tying her shoelaces, thinking about her ex-husband or her past. That might come into the story later, but in order to draw in my reader, I'll put her right at the gym, right in that setting, and have her encounter Ronaldo very soon afterwards so that the story can begin to move forwards. A story has to move forward. So what I'm hoping is that intuitively you are moving the story forward, whether in psychological terms or by allowing your characters to show themselves and their motivation, their needs, remembering that every character has needs and desires. And I'm going to go back to that glass of water that Kurt Vonnegut talks about, that even if it's just a glass of water and the character is craving that glass of water, that craving is going to drive them to the next action. So what I think we're focusing on at the moment as well is action, remembering the what happens next factor, because clearly we want our story to be going towards that destination. So what we're going to do now is just write one last scene, and then we'll take a break for a few minutes. I'd like you to take it all a little bit further, either to the next crossroads or to some sort of conclusion, possibly a resolution. This is also a little mini story, an attempt at just getting something down on the page that you could perhaps work with later, or just to give you a sense of how a story begins to take a shape. So let's just imagine that my gym bunny went down to the parking lot and she and Ronaldo are getting very close and doing some wild and interesting things, and he has a heart attack. So she now is at another crossroads. She's forced to make a decision. Does she report it to the gym, or does she perhaps get out of the car and leave the gym? Which might lead to something else, but we don't know that yet. So just for 10 minutes, what happens next? Whether it's psychological or a combination of psychological interior action and action that happens externally between your characters. So 10 minutes, and then we'll have a break. Okay, that was just a short little tweet or hoot from my night owl. It doesn't sound like a night owl to me, but anyway, that is what that sound is called. And I like the idea of it being a sound of wisdom that's in some way, yeah, it's not an alarm. It is a sound of creating something as well and getting to the end of something. So what I'm hoping by now is that you possibly have a shape of a story, that you're on a journey to finding out about your characters, about your setting, about what can happen between these characters, about some conflict, about the kind of crossroads your characters might find, the forks in the road they might take, or your main point of view character might take. And you can work on that at a later stage if you want. And if you want to start something fresh, you can. What we're going to do now is simply to break for 5 minutes. So I'll see you back here at 1:15, and then we'll do a few more exercises to help you on your way. Okay, please go and do tea or whatever you need for a bit of refreshment. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back. If you're there, if you're still getting your tea, I'll just start chatting and we can get going with the exercise. So the first part was really devoted to just generating a story idea, perhaps working on those questions, the what if, the who, what, when, how, the what happens next, because it really is through asking questions and really making oneself open to the creative process that one gets the ideas and the answers come to those questions. And of course, we always have choices in those questions as to how we're going to take our story. But just being open to the different routes that we can take, the different aspects of our story, actually helps us to create a better story. Because instead of going on one route, one path, one journey, and of course there is an overarching destination, we know what we want to do with our story more or less, by just opening the imagination to all the possibilities, it means that we can make our story perhaps more exciting or discover things about our character and our setting that we didn't know when we began. So what we're going to do in this section is just do a few exercises in order to generate ideas and to look at that whole idea of writing as a journey of discovery. So we're going to do, for the next exercise, we're going to make a list. Lists are also really useful. Lists can be valuable at any stage of the creative process. Making a list can help you solve a writing problem. So if you've got a particular problem, make a list of 10 or 20 or 30 possibilities, and you might just stumble on a possibility that excites you and something that you want to take into the story. So it's a little bit like planning where to go on your journey. You write down all the little towns that you can visit in order to get to your destination, and you decide which one which one or two or three you're actually going to stop in. Think of the word listless as well, which describes a human condition of discomfort, a perceived lack of options. That means that we sit there staring at our screens, wondering what now, and feeling anxious about it. Oh, is my imagination not providing the answers? Where are the muses? Why am I not getting inspiration? So in my experience, inspiration comes when we put pen to paper. So we're going to take a few minutes to open our imagination, open our minds again, and generate an ideas list. The writer Ray Bradbury, a United States writer, early on in his career, generated lists of nouns, and he wrote about this method, saying, "These lists were the provocations that caused my better stuff to surface. I was feeling my way towards something honest, hidden under the trapdoor at the top of my skull." He would then take a noun and start to expand on it, and often within the first couple of pages, a story would begin to form. So for the next 8 minutes or so, sticking to the theme, power, powerless, power imbalances, list anything that comes to mind. It could be a color, it could be a single word, a phrase, or nouns, as Ray Bradbury did. The aim is to list things that apply to your story. So my list could be sweat, ugh, I hate the gym, I wish I had a better body, the clang of a machine, someone grunts, etc. Just let your mind be free, no matter how crazy your list is. And I'll see you in 7 or 8 minutes. And again, just free write, just let it happen. Okay, take a breath, come back to the room. Sometimes our lists might seem a little bit fragmented, but it's a wonderful resource to go back to later, or an exercise that you can try when you're writing the story that you actually decide to write in the end for Power or any other collection that you're working on, or any other story that you want to submit. I'm not going to ask you to write about any of those nouns or words or phrases now, but just keep it in a file. And when you are stuck, then you go back to it and you see if it's going to unlock some ideas for your story. What we're going to do next is just to talk about show, don't tell, which is one of the cornerstones of creative writing. And it involves recreating a scene so that it is immediate and that the reader can be immersed in that scene through the words as if the reader was right there in the moment, seeing things the way the character sees things, hearing what the character hears, sensing through taste, through touch, whatever the character experiences. And the way we do this is to focus on well-placed detail. So for instance, I wouldn't just write in my story, I see a man in the gym. I would write, I see Ronaldo. He is wearing yellow shorts, looks like satin with 3 black stripes on the sides. I see his sweat on his forearm. I see his hairs on his forearms. I can almost taste the salty sweat on his skin. And so we begin to get a sense of who this man is, as well as learning more about what the character, the point of view character, is focusing on. So what I'd like you to do next is to focus on the details, because often it is the well-placed detail that makes a scene come alive. And the reason I'm saying a well-placed detail is that we don't want to overwhelm our reader with a string of details or a string of adjectives. Remember, adjectives and adverbs too are anathema to creative writing. We want to create the sense of the story, but not through adjectives and adverbs. So what I'd like you to do is look at some pictures that we're going to put up on the screen. And if you could do that, thanks, Trish. Okay, so for example, to not just tell a rugby team holds a rugby ball and they seem jubilant, that would be telling, is to look at that picture and really recreate the detail, to look at the grubby shorts, to look at the jubilant smiles, to look at the rugby ball, the colors of it, or in one of the other pictures, to look at the atmosphere, the sense of lighting, not just to say lots of people at a concert hold their hands up high, is rather to say my sister Jenna makes a heart shape with her fingers, and we hear, etc., etc., just to get into the scene with detail. So choose any of these pictures, or if you would prefer a picture in your mind's eye, something pertaining to your story that you're currently working on, see it there as if your eyes are staring at the back of your forehead where the picture is recorded. So if you're writing a story that has in the setting a pylon or electricity wires, notice if they're loose or what color are they. Notice the details. Notice the spark as the electricity wires clang against the pole. Really see the detail. So for the next 10 minutes, either focus on one of the pictures. I think we can go to the next slide as well, Trish. We've got a few more pictures. Okay, there's my bodybuilder. Yeah, so instead of just saying the bodybuilder stands against the wall, we can look at the colors, we can look at his rippled abs and begin to describe him, to really see what is there. So if any of these pictures takes your fantasy, or rather fancy and fantasy, I guess, look at the details of it. And just for 7 or 8 minutes. Focus on showing, not telling. Thank you. See you on the other side.
Joanne, can you go back to the picture of the Springbok rugby team?
Sure. Trish? Okay, just a tip, Bongo. This is also a possibility to just bring them into your imagination, because it's incredible how much we actually see and we store that in our brains. We will go back to the picture, but if we can't get there, just think of that picture, see it at the back of your eyelids.
Okay, no, thanks.
But I'm going to ask Trish now to find it.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Great. Okay, sure.
Okay, thanks everybody. So I hope that you were able to really hone in on detail. Once we begin to notice, to truly look, we can use those details to bring a setting or a character to life. Some writers are better at description than others. It is not my strong point, so it's something that I've got to work on. I really have to look and notice and focus and rewrite sentences of description and find the details that ring true to my style. But again, it's something that we can practice. And it really is that cornerstone of creative writing, the show, don't tell, which is so critical. We're going to do another exercise, and this is on dialogue. 2 characters, I'd like you to start a conversation between them. And what I'd like you to do is to go back to the characters that you wrote about in your previous mini story or your shape of a story. So take your characters and initiate a conversation between them. It could be a day later or a week later. Perhaps it could be a week earlier, but allow them to speak to each other. It could even be a sort of interview between them. What do they say to each other? Remember, dialogue is a way to move a story forward or to provide information, to create a connection between characters, to bring the reader right into the scene. And it's also a cornerstone of show, don't tell. So Ronaldo and my gym bunny might have a conversation in the gym in which they would make their plans. And perhaps instead of Ronaldo saying, I want to make love to you in the parking lot, he would say, follow me down the steps. I'm the 3rd car to the left. And in that case, the information comes across, but it comes across in an oblique way. All right, 8 minutes or so. Conversation, dialogue. Learn things about your characters by having them speak to each other. All right. Thanks, everybody. So I hope you found out something interesting about your characters. And remember, we spoke about this in the last workshop, that you have your antagonist, your main character, your point of view character. So for me, that would be my gym bunny. She is still unnamed. I'm not sure why I didn't give her a name, but I'll do that in the next stage of my writing. And your antagonist, which is the secondary character, and the conflict happens between them. So the antagonist is usually the goodie and the antagonist is the baddie, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's just a more precise way of talking about the characters in literary terms. Now, for the very last exercise, what I would like you to do, I would like you to think of the framework or the structure of your story. So whenever we write a story, we're basically building a structure within which emotions and ideas can live. And the reason I'm suggesting you look at it that way is it becomes this three-dimensional thing, the structure, instead of simply the road moving forward. And yes, think of it as the journey, the road, but it is also can be seen in terms of a structure, a three-dimensional house, a home. Is it a ornate mansion, or is it an RDP house, or an informal rambling beach cottage? Are you writing romance or horror? And that brings us to genre, which we haven't discussed. Do you want your reader to experience comfort or fear? And then what you do is you build your structure, you build your house accordingly. So I'm aware that I'm using some mixed metaphors here in describing a short story. The edifice, earlier I used the beads on a string. Use whatever works for you, but to give ourselves an even more clear sense of what the shape of our story is, it can sometimes be useful to think about it in terms of structure. So just for 5 minutes or so, think of what kind of structure your story has and what kind of atmosphere you're trying to create in that structure. How do you want the reader to feel when they read your story, when they enter that structure? Okay, you'll hear the little alarm go off for the last time in 6 or 7 minutes. And hooray, that is the last little alarm tune you'll be hearing today. So we've really been writing in pretty much informal terms, but what I wanted was that you have a sense of firstly being immersed in story writing, letting a story flow, letting ideas flow, and letting it flow without judgment or self-editing, and then to focus on a few specifics of creative writing. It would have been lovely to hear some of the extracts or scenes, because that is in essence what you're working on, but the group is too big. But I hope that you've had some flashes of inspiration through the writing and that you can now take it forward and rework your stories, remembering that you need to go through at least 3 or 4 edits. So if one considers that the stories you've been writing today, or the characters, the settings you've been working on, if there's something that has really appealed to you and you want to take it further, keep working on it. Keep on releasing those ideas until you get to a time and space in your story where you know it is the end, the final scene. And then put it aside for a couple of days, reread it and see what comes up for you, because you might have more ideas of how to develop it, how to build on it. And I would suggest that you need to go through your story and give it at least 3 or 4 edits. I usually do probably about 8 edits on anything that I'm writing, because a lot of my ideas come through the writing. So what happens when I write is I get the bare bones down. I mean, there is another way of describing a story, you know, the skeleton. You have the framework, and then you go and add the muscle to it, and you decide what kind of positions you're going to place your characters in and how you're going to extend your setting or whatever comes to you. So remember too that sometimes we just have too many ideas. One thing leads to the next, and then another character pops up in our heads. Our mind becomes almost electric. And sometimes also we think, oh, the story sucks. If you lose interest in your story, that's fine. Try something else. But at some point we have to commit to a story, because otherwise, and I do this myself, I start 6 or 7 stories and they all seem exciting at the beginning. My characters seem exciting, but I just haven't managed to take them further. And that's where this process comes in, of asking the questions, of seeing what happens next, of allowing the story to write itself out. And then you go back and you edit it and you work on it. And remember as well, we spoke about the gut feeling. You've got to really think to yourself, yes, this is the story I want to tell. And when it comes to power, remember, power can be corrupt. It can be exhilarating. Coming back to that idea of lighting the dark and democracy. Democracy has enabled us to light the dark. We can say and do more or less whatever we want because of democracy. We're not in a war-torn country because of democracy. And I see that our time is now running out. So I just wanted to say thank you for being with me today. We are having 2 launches of the latest short story anthology called One Life. And Trish will send out details for those. The one is on the 5th and the one is on the 12th of December. Those are for an hour each from 6 to 7. And there you'll be able to hear our wonderful writers chat about their stories and their writing process, because we learn from other writers. And I did say there is no right way of doing it. There are commonalities, but the more one learns of other people's processes, the more it gives us permission to have our own way of doing it. I just want to say as well, All About Writing does fantastic courses, creative writing courses. I really do think it is important for writers to do some kind of basic course, basic training in creative writing, so that you understand more of what setting is, in more detail, what character is, or point of view, or perspective, show, don't tell. All of these things that we've been talking about quite briefly and quite intuitively. We've been experimenting with these things today. But if you understand the elements of style, then you can apply those elements of style. And, you know, coming back to that rugby game, if you don't know the rules of rugby, you can go out there and you can kick a ball about, you can have fun, but you're not ever going to be a Springbok or even, you know, in your community's team, because you've got to know the rules. You've got to have some kind of basic grounding. So look at what All About Writing offers. And I do some memoir courses. I'm planning on perhaps doing more of this kind of workshop for creative writing. So if you're interested, please either let me know or let Trish know. And what more can I say? Trish, would you like to say something?
No, not really, Jo.
Not
but
really. Okay.
I think I will maybe attach or put a link into one of our sort of creative writing guide, you know, simplified guides that might be useful for people. But I'll attach, you know, I'll put the link.
Please do that, because All About Writing offers things like creative writing boot camp, you know, in which you do an exercise probably quite similar to this, but maybe more focused, which really requires you to write every day. And, you know, people do say, oh, it costs money. Yes, any training costs money. We've got to actually see money in a different way. Money is energy. And if it's helping us to build our craft and to know what our craft is all about, then it's worth it. I have done, I did a master's in creative writing, and at the moment I'm currently doing a PhD in the short story, because I've always approached it quite intuitively. And what I want to do with this PhD is understand the short story better. So basically what I'm saying is we all build on our skills all the time. And what I'm hoping today has helped you to do as well is to just build that writing muscle as well, because we do need to sit down for an hour at a time, half an hour at a time. Even as you've seen, 10 minutes can produce results. So I think that's about it from me. Oh, and I don't know if I said this, I might be repeating myself, but oh yes, I did say it. At some stage, commit to your story. And I look forward to seeing some entries from some of you for Power, and the deadline for that is the end of January. And Trish doesn't know this yet, but perhaps sometime in January we might do just a 1 hour session on how to edit your short story, what to look for before you submit, the kind of basic issues that people need to hone before they submit. So it's now 3 minutes past. Thank you so much, everybody. Please leave your comments, and if you've got any questions or feedback, please do leave it. And we're always aiming to improve. We're all learning ourselves. So thanks again, and good luck. Happy writing. Cheers.